No problem. Just take your time. I'm gonna drop the phone call here and then get on this. Hey Ken, what's up?
Hey, what's up? Good to see you.
Yep, always good to see you.
Yeah, hold on a sec. Let me just get this.
Another phone call, another day, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
It looks like you're pretty tired and worn out. So what should we talk about first here? All right, do you want to talk
Anything you'd
about?
like to. Anything that you'd like to. Who am I?
Okay,
What do I do? You want
yeah,
me?
talk about. I'm curious because I've never heard the story on it. Talk about your like prosecution, like what that was
All right, I'll introduce. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Martin Behr. I go by my middle name Kenneth in most cases, and I'm living in Bergen County, New Jersey. I'm originally from New Jersey. I've had a long and extensive career in law enforcement. Among other agencies I've worked for, U.S. Customs. I've been a prosecutor. I've also been a special agent with the Department of Defense. I used to do security investigations. And right now I'm working as an attorney and I handle import and export cases. And I'm located, at least my office is at the Port of New York, Newark, New Jersey. That's 4601. As a prosecutor, I've worked in New Jersey, state of New Jersey, worked in Hudson County. I was with the Hudson County Prosecutor's Office for a number of years. And among our special assignments there, I was with the Sex Crimes Unit, also called the Savior Unit. I started out with the Hudson County Prosecutor's Office just after law school. I started out as a criminal investigator. I had already worked at the jail, the Hudson County Jail. I worked with the general inmate population. And then the prosecutor's office thought it was a good thing to take me on board, not because of where I went to law school. I went to Rutgers University, which is considered to be a liberal law school. But the prosecutor, who's now a judge, decided that he liked me because of my background, which had been law enforcement. I had been with U.S. Customs beforehand, and I had been with the Department of Defense as a special agent. I used to conduct security investigations. So I started in Hudson County as a criminal investigator. I had to wait to hear about my passing the bar examination. I did. Right, I'm licensed to practice law in New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. And right now, I'm also a member of the international. I'm a member of a number of bar associations, but again, my concentration today is upon importing and exporting. Now, when I was with the Hudson County Bar Association, I started out in a civil unit. As a matter of fact, I started out doing appeals in the state of New Jersey before, on occasion, the Supreme Court. And I went there I've done that, the appellate level court. And I used to be assigned to a judge, Judge Grassi, in Hudson County, and I used to give out gun permits. So he and I would make decisions as to who would receive a permit to purchase a weapon. At that time, New Jersey had very severe gun laws. Basically, it didn't want just anybody to have a gun, and we made determinations with respect to who was going to get a firearm. And we also did things with respect to automobiles that we used in the commission of crimes. If somebody used somebody used a car to purchase drugs, that car could be forfeited. And I would handle what's known as in rem actions. Basically, I'd be in court and I'd indicate to the judge that we had a number of petitions. Basically, we were going to ask the court for permission to have the car forfeited to the state of New Jersey. And some people think that this is unconstitutional. I really had the same opinion. How can a man defend himself if he is in jail? And that's happened. Many times people were in jail, and at the same time, their cars were being forfeited, and they did not have an opportunity to defend. Nevertheless, I used to handle a lot of these forfeitures. They went on steadily. We had a terrible time in the state of New Jersey with drugs, in particular cocaine, crack cocaine, and that caused loss of all kinds of property, including houses. Houses could also be forfeited if somebody was selling drugs out of a house. In addition to that, I was a trial team member. I went on a trial team and I handled many a narcotics case, mostly cocaine, sometimes heroin. And I would also handle, other types of cases. They're called felons, uh, basically indictable offenses, meaning they're crimes. They're considered to be pretty serious. Again, you're talking about another type of offense, which is a misdemeanor. I handled those too. I used to handle some gambling cases, but I spent a lot of time on the trial team, and I also spent time with SAVA, and that was the sex crimes unit, and we would try to help people who were in trouble. And we would also try to convict people who assaulted people, and it can be an interesting job. It can also be rather dismaying. You have no idea what people can do to other people. And sometimes the people you get involved in these sex-related cases, they had to do with people within families. And then I got very close to a lot of the investigators there, and went on SABA, as I said, for about 2 years. And then I was also prior to this, grand jury, and I would present cases to grand jurors who would sit sometimes for a month or so. We'd have police officers come in, they would read into the record what happened, and then the grand jurors, usually numbered about 20 people, would take a vote, and they decide whether or not to proceed. They decide whether or not there was probable cause for for a defendant to be brought to trial. And that's where the trial started, with grand jury. Sometimes grand jurors would not accept what the police officers were presenting to them. They thought that perhaps the case was just uh, too difficult to understand and comprehend, and there really wasn't finding a probable cause. And a probable cause really means that it's more likely than not that somebody has committed a crime. And on the basis of the reports that are being read to these people, the grand jurors, they'd make that determination that a crime had happened or hadn't happened. And on occasion, people would say, no, we're not indicting. And that's great. They were also free to ask questions, and many of them did. And as far as other things that I did with the prosecutor's office, I formed some great relationships with public defenders. These are the men and women who defend people who have allegedly committed crimes for free. And again, it's quite an experience. I'm glad I had a background um, that I did. I had been involved in law enforcement, as I mentioned, with customs. It started out on the Canadian border after getting out of Rutgers undergraduate. And I wound up just south of Montreal. I wound up at a duty station called Rouse's Point, and I was also at the Champlain, New York. And I did a lot of immigration work there. There was customs work to be done. That is, occasionally somebody would come in, and I'd have to ask them all kinds of questions about why they were coming to the United States, if they were foreign, and if they were returning residents. I would ask people where they came from. What were they doing up in Canada? What kind of items did I find, or what kind of contraband did I deal with when I was on a Canadian border? Every once in a while, I would deal with sealskin coats. I would find somebody that came from Long Island or New Jersey, went up to Montreal. They'd buy such a coat, and they really couldn't have it. Again, the United States belongs to a number of conventions with respect to animals and endangered animals. And I had to remove the coat from people, tell them that they couldn't have it, and they couldn't have it, and they could petition if they wanted to. They could get a customs attorney, they could fight the case if they'd like to. But I've also took care of many people returning from the Laurentian Mountains. They went hunting, and quite often I would check out the returning U.S. hunters, make sure that their firearms were okay. They had recorded them with U.S. Customs before they left, and I'd ask them about what they had been shooting when they were up there. Quite often, I would say deer, I would say bear, amazing many, and that happened. But I'd also take care of a lot of people coming to back to the United States who had vacation in Canada, and then of course we had a lot of Canadians who wanted to come into the United States. They wanted to go to places like Lake George in New York. And they were also very fond of my home state, New Jersey. Why? Because we had places that they'd like to go down the Jersey Shore. And one of the
Yeah.
places that they really revere is Wildwood, Wildwood Crest. And the Canadians had a radio station down there. As a matter of fact, two of them that had a newspaper, and they loved coming down. Quite often, they didn't know how far Wildwood, New Jersey was. But they're very fond of the people from New Jersey. In particular, they like, or they did at that time, they like to go to Atlantic City and they would gamble. But they've most French Canadians have a pretty good relationship with New Jersey. As far as automobiles coming over the border, yeah, sometimes I would stop people. I would ask them certain questions, and then sometimes there would be a search of the automobile. And if I found marijuana in the automobile was detained, and in a couple of cases, again, people lost the automobile because marijuana is considered to be contraband. And I want to remind people right now that marijuana, as far as the federal government goes, is still in the same category as heroin. So if you're coming into any kind of airport, if you're coming into, ocean terminal, you're coming over the border, make certain you don't have marijuana with you. I mean, most states don't really care much about
Here's a
marijuana.
question for you. What about
Yes.
if they have a 205 card or some type of card to carry it because of a medical condition? Because
No.
some
Well, in
nothing.
that case, no. In that case, they can. But again, it depends on the port that you're coming into. It is, again, in my estimation, there are officers who will seize or arrest, even if you have a marijuana card. It like be coming in, having a marijuana, it'd be like coming into the country with another drug, say heroin. They would not respect the card that went with it. So the U.S. government considers marijuana to be the same thing as heroin. And you got to be very careful if you come into any port of entry. And there are 328 ports of entry in the United States. If you're on the border, be particularly cautious because you can lose the vehicle that you're bringing into the United States. Just the way it is, I don't agree with it. I didn't agree with marijuana laws when I was a prosecutor. I think they're particularly stupid, at least the ones that weren't affected at one time. And as a prosecutor, I put many people in jail, in prison because of marijuana. It all depended on the weight, how much marijuana was being brought into the United States. But you had many people that bring in maybe under an ounce of marijuana, half ounce, or so on. They wound up doing 80 something days in the local jail. And that kind of punishment is indeed severe. So that's what was. And I believe that a lot of the marijuana laws were terribly unfair. But again, remember that if you're coming into the country, you're coming into the United States, don't even have a seed with you. There's zero tolerance right now for marijuana. And even one marijuana seed will do it for you. And as far as arrests go, when I was a customs officer, yeah, I participated in any number of big arrests. I did that at the port of Newark. And if you're near ocean shipping, quite often, when I was a uniformed officer, we'd have ships come in and they would discharge containers. And in these ocean containers, which are made out of zinc and steel, they come in various lengths, 20 feet, 40 feet, 45 feet. Quite often, containers were full of marijuana. And I remember participating in a number of big busts at the port of Newark. We also would make use of narcotics dogs, and I did it on the Canadian border, also did at the port. These are dogs that trained to detect marijuana, cocaine, and heroin. We have dogs. Sometimes we participate with local police. In addition, well, when I was at the port of Newark at 4601, quite often we work with the Port Authority. They had dogs that, again, have been trained to sniff out dollars, money. And again, if you're bringing money into the United States, remember this, if you cross the border with more than $10,000 on you in negotiable instruments, and you're asked about that, declare. Declare that you have money with you. You could bring in $1 billion, but what you've got to do if you have more than $10,000, you must tell the officer. The officer will help you fill out a one-page form. He'll make use of your passport. Just jot down some information about the money. You sign the certificate, off you go. You can bring into the country as much money as you want, and the same thing when leaving the United States. A lot of times, customs officers will be plain clothes at the airports. And if you are bringing money out of the United States, make certain to tell the customs officer that you have more than $10,000 in negotiable instruments. That's money, could be things like checks, again, negotiable instruments. And that's a requirement. The government will make you, fill out a form that's the joint form. It's customs and the IRS. So that's one thing that a lot of people don't know. A lot of people also don't realize that bringing food into the country can get you into a lot of trouble. Even if it's food that the airline gave you, you have a duty to declare. Remember, you can avoid a lot of problems if you declare what you're bringing into the United States. And if you have food on you, definitely declare. The officers or maybe somebody from another agency will make a determination as to the food that you want to bring into the United States. Most items are all right, but occasionally you'll have trouble with items like meat. That will get you into trouble. But just make sure that you declare. If you declare, you're not going to get into trouble. The problem is if you don't tell the officers about what you have on you, you can wind up receiving a penalty. The penalty right now is about $200. And the next time you come into the United States, you're definitely going to be bothered by the officers. You're going to be sent into secondary because you are now a violator of import laws and regulations. And that's not something you want. As far as what's happened over the years with, say, customs, at one time, customs officers had to talk to everybody coming into the country. Now there's really not a lot of talk. Facial recognition technology is being used. Okay, customs already knows a lot about you when you step off that plane. And when you disembark and you make your way to the customs related area, the customs officer that you're going to be dealing with is going to look into a screen, going to look at your image, and it's all kinds of information that customs officers have about you. Again, they have access to all kinds of databases, including NCIC, National Crime Database. They have another one, Treasury. They've got all kinds of information about you. So they don't spend much time talking to you these days. And you're expected to go through customs pretty quickly. Now, when it comes to, I can talk about the local prosecutors' offices, and, you may be thinking about your municipal prosecutor. That's not what I did. I did it on a county level, state level. And we were dealing with a lot of people at that time, especially with respect to drug offenses. Still, number one, realize that when you get arrested for a drug offense, or really for anything, chances are you're not going to be going to trial. Most matters are resolved and it's done by a plea agreement, and that's in about 98% of all cases. All right. Now, there have been a lot of marijuana arrests in the past that have been determined to be very unfair, and a lot of people are looking for some kind of relief from what happened to them. They were arrested. They may not have been able to get jobs that they've wanted because of that. And you may have a record, but the state is taking steps right now to expunge, to make certain that you basically receive a pardon. And if you have a record, ask an attorney about that. The attorneys can help you get your former arrests expunged. And that's something that you may need if you're looking for work right now. All right. So if anybody has any kind of questions right now about law enforcement, etc., I'm also a graduate of the Federal Law Enforcement Center. I went down to Georgia. I've been there twice, and that's because of customs. I was down there about 3 months every time I went down there, and we would learn the law. We got everyday firearms. My old agency, Customs, still in effect now. It's part of the Department of Homeland Security. Has its officers pretty well trained when it comes to firearms. Customs officers qualify with firearms 4 times a year. That's more than any other law enforcement agency. So your customs officers are very good shots, and they've got to basically qualify all kinds of different conditions, night conditions, combat, what have you. They carry 9 millimeters. Now I was Glock, and they have fully automatic weapons too at their disposal in addition to shotguns. So they're very heavily armed. There's about 160,000, excuse me, about 60,000 officers, maybe 62,000 officers all over the United States. As I mentioned, at 328 ports of entry. And something new has happened. If you happen to be around the border, if you're within 100 miles of the Canadian border or the Mexican border, you can be searched without warrant. I want you to know this is something new that's happened. Two-thirds of all Americans, if they live within 100 miles of the Mexican border, the Canadian border, the Atlantic Ocean, or the Pacific Ocean, can be searched without probable cause by the CBP, Customs and Border Protection. They don't need the Constitution. They don't need a warrant. And that's something you should remember when you come into any port of entry, that the Constitution really does not apply. They can search you. They can do a lot of things with you, and they don't need probable cause. They don't even need reasonable suspicion. All they need is a hunch. They can just do so because they want to. And you really have no choice but to comply. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize. Customs officers have more law enforcement authority than any other officer. I remember being at the airport and working with the FBI. Why did they want me? Because people coming in really have nothing to say. There really is no constitution. I could search them, and I did in some projects, some projects we had going, and I did not need any kind of reasonable suspicion. I could search them because I wanted to. So remember that when you cross the border, you're in an airport. Probable cause is not necessary. You can be searched without benefit of warrant. Okay, and the same thing with goods coming into the United States. Whereas with Customs, I also work very closely with Postal Service. I worked in Jersey City, the bulk international mail facility. That's where a lot of packages are coming into the United States. Why would I there along with other officers? Because we did not need a warrant. We could search because we wanted to. And what did we find at the bulk mail facility? We found things like food items that are prohibited. We found plants. We found seeds. We also found weapons. We found pornography. All kinds of things come into the mail. And right now, the United States government is having a tough time. If packages come into the United States and are worth less than $800, chances are no customs office is going to be looking at that package. You don't have enough offices to do so. The idea was to facilitate e-commerce. So a lot of things are coming into the United States right now that are prohibited or restricted or subject to what's known as anti-dumping, special duties. And the Congress wants to do something about it. And the other thing is, if you're going abroad, you used to be given a rectangular white card called the Customs Declaration, Customs Form 6059B. You have to fill it out. What kind of questions were asked of you? Had you been on a farm? Do you have any food on you? Were you carrying more than $10,000? So these are some of the issues you may still be dealing with when you come into a port of entry. The officers have the right to ask you these questions, and they have the right to search you and the things that you're bringing into the United States. And why can they do so? Well, there's a number of U.S. cases. One of them is U.S. versus Long, a Supreme Court case going back to 1977. But the courts have upheld the customs officers' right to search people without benefit of warrant many, many times in the past. And again, one of the reasons that's always cited, because a country must protect itself. And it would be too burdensome to have warrants, if people had to be searched. So when you're coming in through the airport too, realize that the customs officers can look at your laptop. They can look at your iPhone. They don't normally do so, but they can. Okay, so just be aware of the fact that at the border, the Constitution is suspended. You have the Constitution. Other times, when I was a prosecutor, we were keenly aware of this Constitution, both the U.S. Constitution and New Jersey State Constitution as well, and you had certain rights, and the police could not violate. For instance, if people were picked up on a charge, sometimes the defense attorneys would make a motion to see whether or not the stop is constitutional. And many times stops were found not to be constitutional. So the courts are very aware of the fact that you have rights under the Constitution, and they take steps to see that those rights are safeguarded and that you do possess them. And that's what a lot of my friends, the public defenders, did. They would spend a lot of times at motion to suppress evidence hearings. If the police had taken drugs from you, but the stop was unconstitutional, that means that if the judge found in favor of the motion, that's the end of the case. And then I used to spend a lot of time going to prisons as well, and that's a place you don't want to go to. Okay, state prisons are awful. I was recently in Northern State Prison with a client of mine. A client is a former corrections officer. I'm defending the corrections officer because it looks like the state did not turn over evidence. You have to remember that you have to be careful. You must safeguard rights, and you have to challenge when you can. And I'm speaking as a former prosecutor. I mean, I've never been a public defender, but I have worked the other side of the fence. I have defended people. And it takes us sometimes a lot of time, and it takes it's a lot of aggravating circumstances, a lot of frustration, but quite often, a number of judges I've met, and I used to deal with in Hudson County, I have a high regard for them. They did look out for, people's rights. And I'm very grateful for the experience I had, not only being Hudson County Prosecutor's Office, but the jail. And I learned a lot working the jail. Why do people commit crimes? And you can find all kinds of stories. Very interesting line of work. A lot of people in prisons don't belong in prisons. Many of them suffer for health reasons, one of them being marijuana. Again, I thought that the marijuana laws in the past had been abused. But some people claim that marijuana is a gateway drug. I really don't see it as such. I have a relative who has a license to purchase marijuana. Why? Well, my relative has glaucoma, and her physician thought it was a good idea for her to make use of marijuana. So there are some, and it's also used for people who have cancer, pain, etc. There's some very good reasons to make use of that. Unfortunately, some people do abuse the drug. And right now we have a crisis with fentanyl, and Customs is trying to stop it. President-elect Donald Trump is now talking to Mexican authorities. He wants fentanyl to stop being imported into the United States. We have a problem with China, a number of other countries that dealing with fentanyl or have some, not the governments are not really involved, but a lot of people look to make money from the use of drugs. I know the United States is a net exporter of marijuana at this stage of the game, and we have a lot of domestic production of drugs like fentanyl and meth and so on. So I do think more attention needs to be paid to drugs. I'd like to see something done more in the way of rehabilitation. When I was a prosecutor in Hudson County, I never prevented anybody from going into a rehabilitation program. I would encourage them to do so. What was the likelihood that somebody get through a rehabilitation program the first time? Maybe 3%, if that, maybe 2%. But the person could always be brought back for sentencing. And sometimes it takes a long time to get a drug addict's attention. Okay, the person's on drugs and it's not thinking rightly. So I think more time, more effort needs to be spent on rehabilitation. If you want to put somebody in prison, right now the cost is perhaps at least $70,000 a year. Who has that kind of money? One of the reasons we have bail reform these days is because a lot of municipalities, a lot of cities have run out of money. To keep the criminal justice system going, need constant money, revenue. And we just don't have that in the United States right now. We have a lot of people who are living paycheck to paycheck. And you really can't ask the average woman, the average guy for more money for the criminal justice system. Okay, they're having a tough time. You know what inflation is like. You know what the cost of food is like. You've seen what's happened to your car insurance, your rent, everything else has been up, up, up. So one of the reasons for bail reform, for letting people go right away, it's that the municipalities, the cities don't have the money to keep them. They'd have to pay corrections officers more money for overtime, judges, etc. And then you have to worry too about the Eighth Amendment. Is it too harsh? Again, bail should be reasonable. Person should be able to return to face consequences. If there's a trial, yes. But if there's really no reason not to hold them, the courts right now are not going to hold them again. And it's proved a bad case for bail bondsmen. There used to be a lot more of them. But in many respects, a lot of the states and municipalities are having a very difficult time of basically keeping law enforcement resourced. So that's something that's going to continue, and that's going to be an issue in your state, my state, every state in the union. Where do we get the money to support police activities and incarceration? All right. So if anybody has any questions, anybody wants to ask me anything in particular, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting what you said there.
Mm.
Because I'm telling you what, it's not an easy job what you do with everything. Um, However, I want to keep this another 5 or 10 minutes because I want to keep it under well under an hour because it's really a pain to upload. But here's the key thing. You go ahead and prosecute a case, and guess what? Then they're out of jail again. How many times before you have to prosecute them again over the same crimes? Like there's a three-strike rule, I think, or something for certain things. And then there's like, the judge lets them out on simple little things. Like there's
Well, I can
curves.
tell you, judges are pretty good with determining whether a person should be incarcerated or not incarcerated. And the judges don't make up the sentences. They have guidelines to follow. Those sentences, are in place because of state legislatures. These are the lawmakers. They've decided what
Oh, so
sentences.
you don't think there's a loophole in there at all?
No, I mean, sometimes people get off. It all depends on what they're charged with, and has the prosecution proved the elements of the crime. I mean, again, you're right. A lot of people are
Uh,
going to be going back and forth. They're going to wind up going back and forth to jail. Why? In many cases, because they've never been rehabilitated and they really can't fit into society. Many of them don't have the skills necessary to lead productive lives. Now, as far as loopholes go, a lot of people are angry that people are not getting maximum sentences. As I told you, if somebody is arrested and prosecuted, chances are there's going to be a plea agreement or a plea deal between the state and the defendant, and there's going to be an offer. If the person doesn't take the offer and the person goes to trial, what is the likelihood that the defendant's going to get the maximum sentence if convicted? About 100%. And that's what defendants know this. They know that if they don't take the plea deal and they go to trial and they're found guilty, there's going to be no mercy. The judge and the prosecutors and everyone else is going to receive a pre-sentence report detailing that person's life. But because the person has priors and the person took the matter to trial, that defendant is virtually assured of serving a lot of time in a state prison. And state prisons are pretty awful compared to federal prisons. Perhaps the worst type of time to do if one is incarcerated is in a jail. There's nothing to do in a jail. You have to remember that if somebody is going to be sent to jail, it's going to be for less than a year. In the state of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you had something called a penitentiary, and you could
mhm.
put people in penitentiaries up for up to 18 months' time. The person was confined to a cell with a window. The window was high, was located near the ceiling. And the idea was to have the person concentrate, look at heaven, look through the window and look at the blue sky and think about his or her sins. And that's what a penitentiary was. We don't have penitentiaries anymore. Instead, we have jails and we have prisons. Jail is for short time. You can be held there pending a trial. Once a trial is over and there's a conviction, the person goes to prison, and a person can be in prison for the rest of his or her life. And life in prison, as bad as it is, at least it's more structured than jail. And there's certain things to do in prisons that can't be done in jails. In jails, there's really nothing to do. The inmates fight a lot. And what are they squabbling over? They're squabbling over things like dinner rolls or milk or a vitamin pill. And for that, they know it's very serious. They take all this stuff. There's nothing to do. And boredom leads these people sometimes to act out. They should be doing something. Maybe they should be, enrolled in an educational program. A lot of inmates don't have the ability to read. The average American reads, the adult reads at a seventh or eighth grade level. And a lot of inmates don't have that ability. They can't even read at that level. What should be done with them? Well, it's the way, again, it's the way society thinks about crime. If you want to punish somebody, fine, don't give them anything. But certain countries believe in rehabilitation or educating the people. And through education and job training, chances are they're not coming back. That's so in a country like Japan, which has a very slight recidivism rate. In the United States, practically everybody goes back after, say, 5 years' time. That's because they find it difficult to exist in the real world. They don't have the job training, they don't have the vocational training, they can't read. And again, many of the inmates that I've dealt with in prisons and jails in particular are mentally ill. There's a lot of mental illness in the jails, and a lot of people are there too because they've been made crazy. They've been living on the streets.
Hmm.
And if you're sane after living on the streets for a while, you'll be out of your mind in a couple of months. You'll be out of your mind in a week or two. So we have a system here that needs certain improvements, and I do believe that job training is one of the things that the inmates need. They need to have a vocation, something to do that can help them on the outside. Whether it's cutting hair, quite often in Japan, the people who release from prisons who have certificates in basically grooming or, being a barber, they're looked for. I mean, again, businesses want to hire them because they're so well trained. We don't have anything like that here. I wish we did, and maybe we'd have fewer people going through the system.
Mhm.
Yeah, we do have a crisis. Everybody knows about it. We have a job crisis in this country. Yeah.
Okay, one more minute to go here because I gotta make sure that it's under the limit. But I appreciate your time, Ken, for sure. Yeah, this is definitely one of those things in which, different types of topics. I want people throughout the world to come on here. And really amazing what I learn on. Being my own doctor of study of myself in business administration, it takes a lot more than that just to know it all because you don't know, nobody knows it.
Sure. And again, people are going to be arrested. We have the holiday season, and there's going to be a lot of DWIs, driving while intoxicated. Just remember, be careful. And this could also affect immigration status for a lot of people. A lot of people in the United States, not under the best of circumstances, they don't have all their paperwork or they overstayed visas. They may be able to stay here, but they may be deported if they wind up getting an arrest for something like DWI, or in New York, what's known as a pink ticket. You can get a pink ticket or a summons for basically minor offenses. And if you don't pay attention to minor offenses, if you blow off going to court, or if you ignore a court summons, you may wind up in trouble with the U.S. Immigration Service. So a lot of people out there who are not nationals, they're not citizens, they should be very careful if they get something like even a ticket or a summons. They can't these days can't afford to ignore that. That may be the predicate, that may be the reason for their possible deportation. And the president-elect seems to be very serious about immigration and deportations, and that's on everybody's list these days. Some states have gone along with the president-elect that are going to help out with deportations. Others said no. But I remember doing immigration work when I was on the Canadian border. I also did some at JFK and in Newark, but particularly on the Canadian border. And there were all kinds of reasons for me to exclude people from coming into the United States. And